I am Jackie Zahner. Welcome to our first LinkedIn Live event. Very excited to have you here with two amazing guests, Tracy Gray and Gayle Jennings O'Byrne. I just thought I would, hi everyone. Thanks. We want to make this super interactive. So please feel free to post comments, introduce yourself in the comment section. Again, this is our first time doing this. I will do my best to be tracking your thoughts and your comments and pulling them into the conversation today. We're scheduled to go for about an hour. So, welcome and thank you for spending your morning/afternoon with us. Let me just tell you a little bit about myself. Hopefully you found out about this through my platform on LinkedIn. Again, my name is Jackie Zahner. I am a financial feminist. I believe passionately in the power of women using their financial resources in alignment with their vision and values for the world we want to live in and we want to create. I was a partner and managing director at Goldman Sachs. Oh gosh, back in the 90s. I left, spent a decade in wealth management sector before really leaning in hard to philanthropy. I spent the next decade primarily working on building the Women Moving Millions community. Women Moving Millions is a global network of women philanthropists and a few great men that have each given $1 million or more with a gender lens to women's causes. I left leadership a couple of years ago, and after taking some time off to really think about what I wanted to do next in my life, just came full circle and knew in my heart it was really about doing all I can to bring women into a healthy relationship with their financial resources and trying to catalyze more capital, going to women of color, people of color, and really trying to balance and bring more equity to the world of finance, and in particular where capital goes. So with that background, I'm excited about the conversation I'm having today with two women I've been so blessed to get to know, Tracy and Gayle. And I would love, Gayle, I think I said Tracy first. Tracy, I'll pass it over to you first to make an introduction, a little bit about your background, what brings you to this space today, and we'll go over to Gayle. Welcome, everyone.
Thanks, Jackie, and thanks, Gayle, for doing this together and for having me. I really appreciate it. I'm Tracy Gray. I'm the founder and managing partner of the 22 Fund. And the 22 Fund is an early growth fund. We invest in manufacturing companies to increase their export capacity. We call ourselves holistic investors in that our impact that we're trying to have is system-wide and not just one area. So we invest with a sustainable gender, racial, and economic development lens. And that happens through our investment strategy. We don't have to do anything to reach those impacts. My background is I was a systems engineer on the space shuttle program. So as I always say, when people think investing in women and people of color is really hard, I tell them it's not rocket science because I was in rocket science. So definitely not a difficult thing. I came into this, I entered venture capital in early aughts, 1999. Yeah, cannot even think right now, but 1999, I entered venture capital. And from that time, I've been trying to bring an equity lens to venture capital because it's been, since that time till now, the numbers have not changed. They've actually gone down on women and people of color in venture capital. And being someone that starts at a place of justice, and being an engineer, it just didn't make sense. It was illogical. So since then, I've been working on getting this industry more equitable because every industry I've been in is inequitable, including when I was in the music industry. I just heard a stat that 86% of all A&R people and managers and management in the music industry are white men. Now so it's across all industries. And I just always wanted to change that problem. For a while, I had my own fund back in 2008, right before the recession, that was investing in women and people of color and early stage tech. The world blew up. And then I went in, was at the mayor's office as a senior advisor. But since then, every time I've been trying to get back to venture capital and the inequities and to deal with the inequities that exist there. I what really got me is I also started a nonprofit called We Are Enough after seeing the numbers around women and people of color. And like I said, they haven't gone down, but women are actually more successful at investing. We just don't do it. And so my global vision is to catalyze women and women of color to invest in each other.
Thank you, Tracy. No surprise why we are friends. I think we share this common purpose. And thank you for that great introduction. I have so much to dig into already. Gayla, over to you. Talk a little bit about your amazing background and what is the WOCstar Fund?
Yeah, happy to. Thank you so much for having me. Hey, everyone. I'm Gayla. I am a second generation techie business Black woman. My mom is like one of the hidden figures you would have seen in the movie, working with the IBM mainframe and Fortran software. So I grew up in Silicon Valley, where she was relocated, and got to see the early days of technology in Silicon Valley, which is now how we see it today. And so no surprise, I too went into the tech field, and then after a number of years went into banking and had a 17 plus career at JP Morgan, first as an M&A banker and then a couple of other roles. But it was there that I really got the bug for investing. They had a program by which you could co-invest alongside the private equity group. And that bug never left me. So I've been investing ever since and loved it, had some nice returns on some things. And then I started to see the world as it really was, and that there were these really amazing companies that were under-resourced, undercapitalized, and yet they had such high potential. They had the potential that I saw as a kid when I was in Silicon Valley. So I decided to leave a job I loved, a company I loved, and began championing and investing in women of color tech startups. And so WOCstar, which stands for Women of Color Stars, are just that. They are the stars that we're investing in. So it's women of color and it's diverse teams. We are early stage, seed and Series A. We are up and running, but we're still onboarding investors till we get to our target fund size. But we have 9 companies in our portfolio, and we'll talk more about that. But that's a little bit about me. And the last thing I'll say about that company that I left is that they were also great in that they seeded non-dilutively what is now WOCstar. And Jamie Dimon, the CEO of JP Morgan, wrote an op-ed about the importance of this work. So there are allies wherever you look.
There really are. Thank you, Gayla. And I should have mentioned that up front as well. My background, I started angel investing. Gosh, my first company was Tango, which still exists. Hello, Andrea Miller. It was started out as a magazine about love and relationships. And that was, I think, my first one. And I think my third one was LearnVest, which was one of the most successful fintech started by Alexa Von Toll. Very proud investor, in that company around this, idea of bringing women into relationship with their financial lives, and now have a portfolio of 18 companies personally in my direct investments. And the reason I'm doing this with you both is because putting my capital, my social capital, as well as my financial capital in a handful of emerging and first-time fund managers, these 2 wonderful women in funds being 2 of them. So I'd love to talk a little facts and stats because, as they say, statistics don't change the world, people change the world. But statistics, I think in this case, are really compelling. And one of the things I'm trying to do with the She Invests newsletter, which I invite you to all subscribe and share, is just illuminate amazing research and stats. And this latest piece, which featured the 2 of you and spoke to the subject of intersectional investing and the need to put capital behind women and people of color founders, really addresses these gross inequities in terms of numbers and funds flowing into both fund managers and directly and indirectly, of course, into founders, women and people of color that are founders. So, Gayla, I know you are obsessed with numbers in the same way I am. So I'd love for you to share a little bit, just in terms of, and I can punctuated, and I think Madison's going to help populate the chat a little bit, or please look to my article about this. But talk a little about the numbers. What's the business case for doing this in part, even though I hate that we have to do that, but it's more about the opportunity too. So Gayle, over to you to share a few of your favorite numbers and knowing that that fuels your investment thesis.
That's right. And thank you for being a number wonk with me. You know, numbers really matter because in this case, the research, the data, the experience, the outcomes that we're all seeking are there. And so what we've got to start asking ourselves is, in lieu of these numbers, why are we still not investing? Why aren't dollars going to places that we know are profitable and smart investments? So I'm glad we're spending a little bit of time on the numbers because it's really important in terms of like what else may be holding back people from investing in fund managers like Tracy and I and the founders that we see every day. So a couple numbers for people to remember. Luckily, two of them start with the 30%. So those will be easy. 30% greater returns by diverse fund managers or diverse founders. Let me repeat that. 30% greater returns by investing in diverse founders and inclusive teams. Second stat, 16% faster exits by female CEOs, female-led companies. And now the number 30 again, 30% greater exit valuations are being achieved by female founders. So if the name of the game is returns and exits and high outsized returns and valuations, it's been proven that diverse, inclusive teams, female founders will generate those outsized returns. So I'm going to repeat those. 30% greater returns, 30% higher exit valuations, 16% faster to exit. Sounds amazing, right? We should all be in this space, right? It should be overflooded with us funding female founders and female fund managers like Tracy and I. But here's the other stat, and we're not going to stay in this place, but here's the sad stat. Even as we've come out of the summer of marching and racial equality and George Floyd and all the headlines that we saw over the last fall about companies and funds and people being committed to funding in this space, we are at a 3-year low in terms of funding, VC funding for female founders. So that means we are at a 3-year low in terms of VC funding to founders. And probably, I'm just going to extrapolate, probably a 3-year low for funding to female fund managers like Tracy and I. I'll stop there.
Yeah, well, thank you, Gayle. And again, you can refer, there's some resources, links, whatever, behind these numbers that are posted in my most recent She Invests newsletter as well. I'll try to post them in the chat. So Tracy, I'd love to pull it over to you because what we're saying is, obviously, thank you, Gayle, that, and we could say why, and I want to get into the why here, but less than 3% venture capital dollars. Not all companies obviously should get venture capital dollars, but of that money flowing in, those billions of dollars, and I have that stat somewhere, that flow into VC funding every year, less than 3% go to women, and people of color founders, and especially Black women, Latino women, as a group within how we're defining, self-identified women. So then Tracy, as an impact investor, as myself too, you look, despite that is the number, despite the fact that there's, as in this moment, hopefully not a moment, but a place of transition. Maybe we're saying goodbye, hospicing, as someone said, the old economy, trying to bridge and midwife into the new economy. A lot of talk, a lot of lip service, a lot of capital is seemingly wanting to align with a set of values that include, racial and gender justice, climate justice. We know all these are interconnected, and yet, the numbers are where they are. And I want to turn it over to you with an invitation to talk and call reference to your recent article, Stanford Social Innovation Review at the end of last year, which really was talking about the complicity of, in particular, of institutional capital related to foundations who have these values, right, who distribute capital and make grants around a set of values, and yet their investment capital is left dormant. So just over to you to kind of bring in the stats and how you would make sense of these things, and your role, which has been forever, to educate and to empower and to invite people to change those numbers.
Yeah, I'm a Buddhist, so I really don't think people have bad reasons for not doing what they're doing. I think everybody means well, but meaning well doesn't move the needle, right? And you have to look at the system that you're part of. I don't like to use the word complicit because it sounds like, negative, but if you're part of a system that keeps these numbers where they are for the 20 years that I've been in venture capital and in this ecosystem, then you have to admit there's a problem. And I want to add a couple more stats because it's not just, first of all, Latinx women receive less than 0.1% of venture capital, and Black women receive 0.00. I never know how many zeros, but 0.0006% of venture capital. That literally is a rounding error, right? And then you think, okay, philanthropy is going to do better and loans are going to do better. Well, women only get 4% of all commercial loans, and we have to pay them back sooner and at higher interest rates, even though we're less of a risk. And then in philanthropy, women and girls only get 7% of all capital, and women of color get 3%, girls of color get 3%. That's philanthropy. So when I heard that number, and I will credit Tracy Younger from the Ms. Foundation for highlighting this to me, when I think about, well, we're all in impact investing, relying on philanthropic dollars to be the change, yet they are part of the barriers in the system that stop the money from flowing to diverse fund managers and women fund managers. And I experienced it on two sides of the coin. I am on an investment committee for a philanthropic endowment, and I'm raising a fund. So I see on both sides that the system, which is not to get too technical, but there are consultants or outside investors who invest the dollars for the philanthropy and the foundations. They're part of the greater mainstream system. They are the same people that invest dollars for Morgan Stanley or for BlackRock. And they use the same kind of due diligence. And within what's called the due diligence questionnaire that we all have to fill out are barriers. So for first-time fund managers, so all those, one of the numbers we didn't mention, that 6% of all fund managers in venture capital are women. And that stayed the same since 2020. It might have actually gone down, which we're all numbers people, statistically impossible when all of these women are people of color are coming into the system. And so when you look at that, there's no place for us to go other than to start our own firms, right? But the requirement is you have to have a track record with the investment strategy you're investing. But if we're not allowed in those firms to get the track record, how do we do that other than to start our own funds? But then on the other side, they won't invest in first-time funds. Then they want you, I'm going to do one more example because I don't want to go too deep into it. They want you to have work together. Well, if one of us can't get into the firms, how are two or three of us going to get in together to work together? So I want to highlight that because it's just this catch-22 throughout the system. And unfortunately, the impact investors and philanthropy and foundations are complicit in that. So we wrote this article with the steps of how you can change that. You can change your requirement of track record and look at it differently. I mean, if you read Gayle and I, our background, and I swear if we were white men, money would be thrown at us, right? Because we have stellar background and our teams have stellar background. But because of those examples I gave you in the system, it's just the capital's not flowing. On the other side, diverse fund managers, as Gayle mentioned, outperform on every measure. Diverse PE funds outperform 62.5% of the time, and diverse PE funds outperform all US buyout and all US private equity by 1.39 times. And first time, there was a report that said first time managers outperformed established managers over the last 13 years, every time except one time. But we won't reach parity for another 400 years for women and people of color. And then finally, when you invest in women and people of color fund managers, especially women of color fund managers, that's when trickle-down economics actually works. They saw that women VCs hire invest in 2 times more female founders. They invest in startups with at least one founder, and the founders hire 2 times more women. And a company with female founders and a female executive hire 6 times more women. So everywhere we go, there's plenty of research. We don't need any more research. If I see someone doing more research about how well we do, I don't know, my head's going to explode. We've made the case. The case has been made. We need to move now to action.
My head will explode with you, Tracy. Thank you for saying that.
Well,
no, and I think we're right. It's time for action.
Yeah. Well, and again, for people who need research, you know, it was sort of my thing over the years when people would say, we need another piece of research, and I would go, really? And then I would say, please see my report of, thanks to Laura Moore, who's on the call today, who's helped me with it for over a decade. We've aggregated over 650 reports in 23 different categories around everything we're talking about. And it's painful to have to continue, it seems, to lean on statistics or be questioned about the validity of them, you know, when even common sense would argue that a certain path should be clear. 2 things I just want to respond to, and then Gayle, I'd love for you to respond to, because then I want to jump into this theory of change. And even though I hate trickle down, I feel like it should be trickle up economics. That is the term, and this idea of zero-sum game, which I want to get into. But what you said about these catch-22s, I mean, not everyone on this call today, of course, might have the resources to invest in funds, but understanding the life cycle of what happens upstream in terms of who makes the decisions about capital and how that affects, you know, our economy and the outcomes, especially when it comes to wealth. And I quoted a lot of statistics in the article. I'm just pulling them, a couple of them up here. Sorry, give me 1 minute. Around this research done about the differences between wealth had by white American families and Black wealth. And basically this one, the Brookings Institute found that the net worth of a typical white family in the United States is 10 times greater than the average net worth of a Black family. And the economics, these, I would like to say, trickle up economics are fundamental to changing the financial well-being of this country, you know, and words without looking at the money trail. And that's really what we're talking about here, and how it flows, how money flows into and through systems, and how wealth, not just sustainable, being able to sustain yourself and have basic sustenance, but how you accrue wealth in this country is fundamentally connected to everything you were saying, Tracy. And it's, if we don't, and that's what I love about the thesis of your fund too. It's about thinking about creating better jobs, more jobs for people of color in this country. So I want to push into a little bit, just looking at our time here, into this theory of change, and let's change the wording and talk about trickle up economics of what you all are doing and sort of the opportunities you're seeing. And combine that, if you want to sort of comment on it, and I threw this in the article, this idea that of zero-sum game, which I feel like we're being sold all the time, that if one group, because we're such a polarized country, if we focus on one group and one group rises up, that it means the others fall behind. That it's like a teeter-totter rather than a lifting of, I would say, you know, the float or the tides. So Gayle, I want to turn it back to you to talk a little bit about sort of how you see that theory of change, and why, yes, investing in funds matter, but how money flows through the system, and how you've sort of witnessed it even in your own life and in your own community, why this matters so much when we're talking about where venture capital goes and who's making the decisions.
Yeah, happy to. And let me start by saying, because I think you hit on something really important, that the people that are in the audience right now that are on this call with us in this conversation, maybe not all of you are investors, right? But think about this. You are and can be an ally. So this is not a investment pitch meeting to you, right? We're not selling you on our funds. We'd love for you guys to join us and be a part of it. But more importantly, the theory of change, I think, is going to start when we all see ourselves as allies. Now, that word gets thrown around a lot too, but I think if we think of like, how can we be an ally to someone else? It will really change this change theory that we're talking about. So one is you can invest. Another is you have resources that you can make available to others. You have introductions. You know, we had one person call and say, how can I help? And I said, you know, so-and-so, you've seen what we're doing. I would love if you could just make a call over there and just give a stamp of approval for us. 5 minutes out of his time, and it was so invaluable. And sometimes that's all we need to close the deal, is just to have someone else validate who we are, right? I hate to go back to things like hidden figures, but in some ways, all the work that we're doing without validation by others, it can almost get hidden. So I just want to stop and pause there, that allies can be investing, allies can be making introductions through your personal network, allies could be bringing us into the corporation where you work and say, hey, I just heard about these amazing women. I wonder if there's a way through our marketing, our sponsorship, some programming, some speaking engagements. Is there any way we can be in their lives and support them and the founders? Okay, anything else on allies? Did I miss anything? Is that resonating with people?
Yeah, well, I put my high five up. Well, and that's exactly what we're doing here. I think we can be so, like when you think about the resources to what you said, Gayle, we can bring, not everyone has capital, but I read some crazy statistic that I don't have at the tip of my fingers. We might be 1 degree or 2 degrees away from that kind of capital, or, you know, remembering that businesses will only be successful if people buy their products and services. So, for example, I'll lift up one in my portfolio. There's a company I invested in. I was introduced through the Bumble network, Whitney Hurd and Serena Williams. That was awesome. I had an event, and I met this amazing woman named Natalie Egan. She is transgender. She started a company focused on bringing sort of a cultural change, diversity, and inclusion software. So, you know, obviously I'm passionate in the sector. I'm passionate about her. She's an amazing founder, and she brings such a unique set of experiences to her work and culture change. You know, having been a identified white male, now a transgender woman, and I can invest in that company. I can bring other investors, but until people open the doors to buy her product and her service, you know, nothing happens. So we are to know that we have that relational social capital, we have financial capital, and within that relational and social is the political clout to be able to go to our companies, because we hear of these companies, because we're paying attention, because we're investors, and champion for the purchase of those products and services, right? And oppositely, when we are buying products and services without looking through potentially to the values or the story behind those companies, we're complicit. I think I can use that word in that definition comfortably. We become complicit about supporting the financial systems. And not to say that, you know, we don't, just because, you know, as someone's a white male founder doesn't mean they're awesome. It's just about mindfulness, about values, and trying to make sure that all our resources, financial and otherwise, are being aligned. So that's how I would, you know,
and I would, that's right. And I would add to that, we also have to think differently about where innovation and technology is coming from. Guys, the fact that we're on this LinkedIn Live together, the fiber optic cables that are carrying this data, that was an invention by a woman of color. I'll give you a couple more, and please remember these, because if ever anyone says to you, is there a pipeline? Are there enough things in tech to invest in by women of color? remember what women of color contributed to society and think about how better your life is because of these. We call it female arbitrage, but if we don't start investing in these companies, think of all the things we may be missing. You can't think of them? That's okay. I can't. I see them. That's why I'm doing this.
And that's why you make sure you follow Gayla.
But here's a couple more. And we've got a video. We'll get to the link to it. And you could just blast it out. Like if you could blast it out, that'd be amazing. Your iPhone, your Android, caller ID, call waiting. Black women invented those. We're now starting to fly again. That call button to get the flight attendant's attention or to tell her someone's not wearing their mask. Invention by a Black woman. CCTV, nanny cams, Black woman. So again, the invention and contribution by diverse, inclusive teams is real. The returns in money is real. We just got to get real about wanting to be a part of it because they're benefiting our lives. I'll stop there.
Tracy, I know you want to jump in here, so you go for it.
Well, I don't know the number. It's another Gayla number, but about how much money our economy left on the table by not investing in
billions
Black people. And I also want to try to create a sense of urgency. You know, people felt it last summer when you saw, you know, Black people being killed on the street and while you're watching it. But what isn't highlighted enough is we talk about this she recession where most of the jobs that disappeared were for women, but 40 and 50% of the businesses that disappeared that are not coming back because of the pandemic were brown and Black businesses, and the majority of them are women of color, right? Yet we add so much to the economy. So when you have 40 to 50% of businesses that add to the economy gone, if that's not a sense of urgency, I don't know what's going to create a sense of urgency. So I really wanted to highlight that. And Gayle gave some great examples of inventions by Black women. We also, you know, what I do by investing in that non-sexy industry called manufacturing, I do that because that's the foundation of our economy. During the pandemic, highlighted all the inequities that we're talking about. It's shown a spotlight on everything. And if we would have had capital going to manufacturing, we could have pivoted with the PPE we desperately needed if they had capital to pivot. But most of them didn't have capital because people don't think about this sector. Yes, you know, innovation and startups and Silicon Valley, Silicon Beach, Silicon Alley, all the silicons. But in the heartland and in the urban core, there's manufacturing. And manufacturing hires everyday people. So our mission is increasing generational wealth through entrepreneurship, but also creating what we call the clean quality jobs of the future for women and people of color in low and moderate income communities. And that's what manufacturing does. The beauty about manufacturing right now is it's tech-based and tech-enabled. So that proverbial blue-collar worker that is, you know, taking a widget, putting it together, they now have to have analytical skills. They have to have tech skills. So manufacturing is a way to bring women and people of color into the tech sector where blue-collar workers are not being let in or sharing in the profits, right? I mean, we three, I don't like to use the word elite, but we have, I don't know how many degrees between the three of us, how much experience, but that's not your average person in this country. So they're not, and tech startups, they can only hire a certain segment of people. But manufacturing brings in everybody into the tech sector, which is, we call it a back door into the tech sector because the front door where mainly white men are isn't open to all of us. And, you know, as in people think, oh, women aren't in manufacturing, that's men. Well, there's an organization called Women in Manufacturing. There's 7,000 members, and almost 300 of them are women CEOs or women founders. Excuse me. So that's what we do. Looking at, and we're complementary to Gayle because her companies will need this capital later. Excuse me, I have a little cough. I'm going to go off for a sec.
Get some water. Well, thank you. And it is, there tends to be a focus, especially in, venture capital and around sort of the sexy, scalable, immediately, exiting negative net revenue businesses. But, as you said, the lifeblood of this country is and the employment is both, in manufacturing type jobs and in small businesses, single proprietary businesses. And, even though that's not necessarily, how you support that with your consumer purchasing power, there are also companies like Hello Alice. Actually, it's another company that I invested in very early, celebrating the fact they just raised over $20 million in a Series B. And their scale is achievable because they're really helping small businesses find their way into PPP funds, into loans, into a more sustainable ways to support and grow their businesses. That is low cost to them because companies come in and sponsor. So there's amazing tech companies whose mission and purpose it is to support, in some cases, the types of businesses that we're talking about. And venture, I would say that they had a very hard time raising their initial capital because serving who, for what, what's the exit? So I think different fund managers with different sets of values and different investors can say, look, it's not about the big exit and scalability. Sure, that's great, but it's also about impact. And I think the impact investing world kind of gets that. And I think, it's heartbreaking to me to some degree that, the self-professed impact investors are not leaning in hard to fund managers such as yourselves, because it just doesn't make sense to me whatsoever. And I want to pull on that string a little bit. I know we're all part of this community. Suzanne Beagle and Darianne Rodriguez started called the Gender Smart Community. I linked to some resources that they have put together. They basically have put together lists of funds that have a racial, intersectional, gender lens. They also created an amazing guide to investing in diverse managers. Again, you'll find those resources in my latest article. But one thing that we know, and again, I pull the statistics from the piece, and to your point, Tracy, where there can be no place for career growth trajectory or even just feeling at home, at a firm that perhaps is less likely to value what you might bring to the table and see you as a one and only, was certainly a reason, something I felt throughout my career to some degree. So amazing women, people of color say, okay, I had some experience, may or may not have that same type of experience, but now I'm starting my fund. There are dozens, I know, because Rose Maisner is on the call and we've been tracking them, like literally dozens of emerging first-time funds. Tracy, you talked to the challenges a little bit, in raising money and with the problem with the system. But let's talk a little bit more about what it will take to invest in this thesis, not just dollars, but an attitude shift, and what's your counsel or advice? And I, as a white woman with money, I'm holding myself accountable and invite women like myself to embrace this strategy. But I would just love to hear more from your experience about, allyship. Gayle, you mentioned that. But what will it take over how long? And what do you see as those massive interventions that could really tip the scale in terms of this investment thesis we're talking about?
Yeah. If I can go first, and if I can be really real for a minute here, I promise I won't use any swear words. But
you can use will LinkedIn bleep it out. Is this like NBC?
Yeah. Is it delayed? Will they bleep me?
Say that keyword and see what happens.
I love it. If we want to get really real here, we need to be okay with the fact that there's a population of people that have different experiences than you may have that can do the job better than you. I would love to have a debate with someone who thinks they can find and build and grow and invest in my sisterhood better than I can. So I think we've got to have a real conversation about power, trust, and a belief in other people that may not look like us, that may not have the same experience, that may not be at the same alma mater, come from the same alma mater, and believing that they can do the job that they've committed to do.
Heck yes, Gayla.
Yeah, and when you bring up, there's a word you brought up, and I like to quote Joy Anderson from the Criterion Institute. My favorite quote is, finance is not about money. It's about power. Mm-hmm. And meaning who has the power in decision-making about who gets what investment. And right now, the power is 98.7% in white man's hands. And I think in your article, you might have said 97, somewhere, whatever it is, it's too much, right? It's not balanced at all. And I think that's what we have to really think about. And the solution to this is for the powers that be is to admit it is not a risk to invest in women and people of color or first-time funds. Full stop. Like I said, all the research shows it. So if you are, and we all throw around our fiduciary duty when we're on endowments or on investment committees, but then you're not really meeting your fiduciary duty if you're leaving money on the table by not investing. So you should, every investor in any fund or anything should be shouting from the rooftops, you're not doing your job. You are not doing your job investing. And FYI, in my article, I wrote, when you look at every financial downturn calamity we have had, who's been at the helm? White men. Yet no one says, oh, they're risky. No one says that. No one has done, I constantly said, why has no one done a research paper on the risk of investing in white men, right? Like, has that, and Gayle, do you know what's
No. I was just gonna say, I'll give you again. I'm the numbers geek. I'll give you one stat.
Thank you. I think you should say to some dudes out there.
Listen, when I gave you that,
you need a new form of The Apprentice. Ha ha. Get the connection. Anyway,
when I gave you that stat about 30% higher exit valuations by females, what I didn't tell you is that at the same time, the same period, male CEO-led companies, their valuations are 44% lower. So
that is what I'm saying, and it's exhausting complaining about this.
Yes, it is. I'm so damn tired. I'm tired.
It's exhausting complaining. I even gave up for Lent. I gave up complaining for Lent because
I wish it was calorie burning.
It was so.
I'd be a skinny bitch by now.
But there are solutions. One big solution that the system can make, and I know Gayla has heard this. I know Jackie has heard this. Every meeting I have with an institutional investor, and so institutional investors are those brand names you've heard of, all the investment banks, Morgan Stanley, JP Morgan, Goldman, insurance companies, anyone that is a large-scale investor, they're always saying, well, we can't come in first. So then you get, I have all women pretty much in my fund. I have a couple of institutional investors, but it's all women in them. But that's not enough for institutional investors. Even if you gather like 100 women, individual investors, they still won't come in until another institutional investor comes in. So that's another catch-22. But if we had institutional investors that were catalytic, or foundations that were catalytic, even foundations do this, right? They won't come in first. That will come in first for a bunch of first-time funds or second-time funds. That's how we scale horizontally. Right now, we're scaling vertically. There's a handful of funds by women of color that are getting all the money. Everyone piles on because they get that one institutional investor, then was like, oh, that seems safe. I'll just jump in there. But we really need the people to be more brave, these institutions to be more brave. And it doesn't take much to be brave if you know you're going to get higher returns with this segment. I mean, like, how is that courageous and brave? You're just investing where the money is. So catalytic investments, first big, large checks and first time funds, that changes everything. Everything.
Yeah. Well, and I was going to, it's interesting because that's one of the things I'm trying, and you see She Place all over. It's a new company I've recently started here in Park City. And one of the things I really hope to do is gather women with financial resources such as myself to try to syndicate, so to speak, bring people together so we can, I'm already trying to do that informally and invite other women and men who, want to come and share due diligence processes to come in, and also attract the big capital. I wrote an article as well with, and not to judge how folks invest their money, but I was really interested in Melinda French Gates and Lorraine Powell Jobs. And of course, we just heard the latest billions of dollars by Mackenzie Scott, and the billionaire women. Like, I'm not a billionaire woman. I wish I was. Maybe one day I will be. But, you see these, and it's part of what I want to pound my head against the table, is that women, and I said this in the piece, and it's an article I want to write, and I know that because I was in Women Moving Millions, and I thought it true for a while myself, and it's safer to think that philanthropy can solve problems, right? It's just safer, it's more comfortable, it's more socially acceptable, and it's just flawed and wrong. It's just wrong. And if women can, control half the financial resources in this country and yet leave their investing to the side, especially when they have capital, and we're not even saying this is risk capital, we're just saying capital, and are not engaged with it and are not challenging their investment advisors to say, I want to do this with my money, and if their investment advisors are saying, no, don't, risky, walk away from that investment advisor, because their job is to help you align your values with your capital. And it's just such a pet peeve of mine. And, to the point of too much research. I mean, I'm holding myself accountable for that. It's why I'm investing with the two of you. It's why Rose and I are doing the work that we're doing to identify founders of women of color founders and fund managers, because I really believe it's the single most impactful thing we can do with our capital. You can do philanthropy, that's great. But to not do this is, working against that capital in a major way. That's a big pet peeve. And I'd love, yeah, Tracy, we have 10 minutes and I'm pulling a couple of comments, but please respond to that, because I do think white women and women of color, Black women, really have to be working together and supporting each other and not afraid to hold each other accountable and to be in relationship and dialogue. I think that's what I want to do. And I have, so much to learn and grow, with both of you at my side. And we cannot be afraid of being uncomfortable, because that is not going to solve the problems of this world.
I just wanted to highlight before we get to the end of this that Jackie really is walking the talk, and it's not, I'm not saying that to, blow smoke up your ass or anything, like
I've been working on my twerking. It's good for the abdominal muscles.
I really do. Like I've seen, and I don't want to sound this patronizing, but I've seen, a growth in certain women, all of us, and you are really have been like jumped full in, not just dipping your toes, but just have jumped into that nice water, So I just wanted to highlight that before we.
Thank you.
I second that. And I think this is a prime example of what allyship looks like, right? Being willing to have courageous conversation, trusting us to know the population and the segments that we're investing in, and yet still being there too, to be on the journey with us and check in on us, see how we're doing. How's the day going? What can I do to help? Let's get on a call. Let me introduce you to some of my friends. Let's open this up. Let's have a dialogue, right? This is courageous conversation. This is allyship. This is how we get back the $507 billion that the US GDP lost last year because we were under-resourcing women of color, underinvested.
In 1 year.
5 million jobs, right?
Yeah, and this is such, I want to pull in a couple comments. I had so much more to say about this, but it, gets to that zero-sum game too. Like we have to be in this together and believe that we can help it. And this is the tagline for She Place, you know, to flourish. I love that word, to flourish, you know, and we can be invested in creating the conditions where everyone can flourish. And when one group, one person, or one company gets money, let's celebrate it and, you know, not diminish it, you know, to think that comes at the expense of others, because I really just don't believe that. So we've had a couple like, great, thank you for your high fives in the chat and posting resources. There was a note, and I think this was in the chat, you know, that we should be talking about, and I'm curious, I think language matters, talking about marginalized as opposed to minority communities. I like that language. I think we're trying to do that. And there's a question from Sean. Curious what your thoughts are on the emergence of fund managers that are focused on minority owned, I'm just pulling the language, marginalized community focused startups. Do you believe this trend will continue? And I would just add that that's a great point, because research we're showing is that there's a huge number of first-time fund managers, emerging managers that are trying to raise money. And I think we are at a catalytic point where if we got, and I've heard estimates of 250 million-ish, but it doesn't take that much, 300, 400 million to fund a whole family, a whole cohort of emerging managers that certainly deserve the capital. So I think we are at that point, and curious if you think this will happen or it'll be just another moment that passes by. Tracy, over to you.
First of all, I don't believe any of us use the term minority on here. Not one of us. I don't use the term because the majority of the people the majority of the people in the world are people of color. So I never use minority anymore. I use people of color, women of color, BIPOC. Yeah. So that's one thing. But also, for so long, and this is once again philanthropy, foundations, people have saw women and people of color as victims of things that are happening in the world, from climate change to racism, what have you. But then white men are trying to come up with a solution, especially around climate change and clean technologies. We are going to be the innovators because we experience the problems every day, and multiple problems. So and we've been looking at the solution for climate change for how long? But all the money has been going to white men. What needs to change? Invest in the people who are experiencing the problems the most, and we will come up with the innovations to make the change. So that's what I wanted to highlight, that we are the innovators, not the victims. Gayla?
Gayla, give us a couple minutes and then I'm going to wrap it up for us all.
Yeah, so to that question, I love the space that we're in now, that there are a lot more fund managers that are on the scene. You can go to our website, WOCstar.com, and we have a list of them. So listen, we are fund managers, but we are also collaborating with other fund managers. All boats rise. We are also, Tracy, Jackie, are part of an Ally Collab in which we showcase and have due diligence, right? So if due diligence is an issue for you, we have peer due diligence, a cohort of funds if you're interested in getting involved in this space. I think, though, that we also have to understand that so many of these funds are very small. We're on a pathway to 50 mil, but that's still a very small fund in terms of the types of checks we want to write. So at some point, we also have to think about the system as a whole, and what does it mean to be significant investors in the entrepreneurial population that exists. And that's different than each of us as a silo fund.
Thank you. Well, and there are a lot of questions. Jennifer, I see you. Thank you for joining. Jennifer is an amazing woman I know that wrote an amazing book about her journey, and others on the call. I mean, I'm going to be continuing to write about this and posting resources in all our She Invests newsletters. Also, join us on sheplace.com, where you can join our Mighty Networks community. And over time, we're going to be building out that platform. And again, there's so many resources, with the question of what, and I'd like to just put it back to you all in closing, well, let me put it back to you first, Gayle. So people saying, what can I do? Obviously, if you have the resources, invest in a fund strategy. as we've talked about. So give folks a couple more to-dos. Tracy, over to you. I'll add mine and we'll dance our way out of this 1 hour time together.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Gayla, sorry.
Yeah, really quickly. You can invest in funds. You can support the Ally Collab, which you can reach out to Tracy and I, and we're asking people to raise their hand, be allies. Some of you can also introduce us to your organizations, whether it be your professional or your personal networks. And the other is you can just get the word out to other people about folks like us, just like Jackie's done today.
I have to say, I'm bad on this platform, so I just saw everyone's comments. I was like, why aren't there any comments coming in? And now I just saw them all. So thank you, everybody.
Oh, I just saw them too. I didn't know I could see them.
Yeah, you can see them. There's another way you can, if you're not comfortable with investing yet, there's a way you can still be part of the WOCstar or the 22 Fund by going into a DAF, where you can move your philanthropic dollars into a DAF and then invest in our funds. Impact Assets has one for the 22 Fund, but that's a way for everyone to come in. But thank you, everybody, for your comments. I see people I know and love, and it makes my morning.
Well, Maddie's gonna. I think my tagline should be putting the fun back in finance, because this really can be joyful. Investing can be joyful. It doesn't have to be painful. And especially when you align your money with your values, it is joyful. And getting to know the two of you, working together, partnering, being able to be part of the lives that you're going to change with the folks that you're going to invest in is just going to be a joy for me for the next decade. We're in it together for a decade. How does that feel, ladies? We're in it for the long haul. So we're going to answer with tunes. Maddie is ready. Oh, it's happening. I want to thank everyone for joining. Any comments? Please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. Okay, where's my bobblehead? Oh, we have together. Thanks, everyone. If you want a dance party,
yes, please reach out to us. Gayla@WOCstar.com.
Gray at the22fund.com. There's even my favorite guy on here. Hi, Eric.